Aussie superstar Keith Urban has appeared on stage in America for the first time since his divorce from Nicole Kidman was made public. There was no mention of the turmoil in his private life.
For nearly 2 decades, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban seemed untouchable, proof that love could survive fame, distance, and the glare of Hollywood's lights. They smiled through red carpets, shared stages, and called each other soulmates. But in 2025, that picture-perfect illusion shattered with just one lyric, a quiet change in a love song that sent shockwaves across the world. What really ended their marriage? Was it the pressure of 2 powerful careers colliding, or something far more personal, a secret that had been quietly growing between them for years? Fans replayed that viral concert clip again and again, looking for clues in his voice, in her silence, in the space where love used to live. But the truth behind this heartbreak didn't begin with scandal. It began with 2 people searching for peace in a world that never stops watching. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe because this story only gets more unbelievable from here. Nicole's first love, Tom Cruise and the scars that stayed. Before Keith Urban ever entered her life, Nicole Kidman had already lived through a love story that defined and nearly destroyed her idea of forever. The year was 1990. She was just 23, a rising Australian actress with red hair, raw talent, and a heart that believed in fairy tales. On the set of Days of Thunder, she met Tom Cruise, one of the biggest stars in the world. He was confident, magnetic, and already a household name. To the world, their chemistry was instant. To Nicole, it felt like destiny. But behind the glamour, there were warning signs and people who saw what she couldn't. Her agents, friends, even some family members advised her not to marry him. They said it would ruin her career, that she was too young, and that stepping into Tom's world meant giving up her own. Nicole didn't listen. She wasn't chasing fame, she was chasing love, pure blinding love. So she dove in headfirst, unaware that the next decade would test her spirit in ways she could never imagine. Their wedding was lavish, and the press hailed them as Hollywood's golden couple. Together, they adopted 2 children, Isabella and Connor, and for a while, Nicole's life seemed perfect. She once said she felt safe with Tom, that being with him gave her a sense of belonging in a world where everything was fleeting. But that sense of safety came at a cost. Over time, her individuality began to fade. She was no longer Nicole Kidman, the fearless actress. She was Nicole, Tom's wife. Every red carpet appearance, every interview was defined by their marriage. Behind the smiles, she struggled with an identity quietly slipping away. In one interview years later, she admitted that during her 20s she lived in a bubble, sheltered from reality by fame and love that often blurred into control. Then, after 11 years of marriage, the bubble burst. In 2001, Tom Cruise filed for divorce, abruptly, without warning. Nicole was blindsided. The woman who had given everything, her heart, her career momentum, her trust, suddenly found herself alone. The world saw headlines and speculation, but what few understood was the emotional wreckage left behind. The divorce didn't just end a marriage, it fractured a family. Her children, still young, grew distant in the years that followed. Nicole rarely spoke about it publicly, but those close to her said it haunted her deeply, that she carried guilt for years, wondering if love always came with loss. And yet, through that pain, Nicole didn't turn bitter. She turned inward. She began choosing projects that reflected her own emotional rebirth, roles that were dark, raw, and fearless. Films like The Hours and Moulin Rouge weren't just performances, they were therapy. They were the voice of a woman learning how to live again. Still, beneath the success, something remained fragile, a quiet longing for stability, for someone who wouldn't see her as a trophy, but as a person worth protecting. After years of surviving the glare of one of Hollywood's most public breakups, Nicole wasn't looking for another star. She was looking for stillness, for a love that felt like home. So when Keith Urban walked into her life years later, humble, soft-spoken, carrying his own scars, she didn't see a celebrity. She saw safety. She saw a man who, like her, had been broken but was still trying to heal. And that's where their story really began. Not in a red carpet romance, but in 2 souls quietly hoping they could find peace in each other's arms. Keith Urban's past, the rock star haunted by addiction. Before he became the man standing beside Nicole Kidman, Keith Urban was fighting a battle that few people ever saw, one that started long before fame, guitars, or country charts. Born in Whangarei, New Zealand, and raised in Australia, Keith's story wasn't about glamour. It was about grit. His childhood was filled with music, yes, but also with chaos. His father, by Keith's own admission, struggled with alcoholism, and that shadow followed him everywhere. In interviews, Keith would later say, "I grew up in an alcoholic house, and it took me a long time to believe I was wired the same." That sentence says everything. He wasn't just afraid of losing control, he was afraid of becoming what he'd watched as a child. But as his career began to rise, so did the pressure, the expectations, and the temptations that come with success. Fame doesn't heal wounds, it hides them behind bright lights and applause. By his 20s, Keith was already a rising star in the country music scene, charming, handsome, and talented enough to make Nashville take notice. But behind the smooth voice and the confident smile was a man relying on alcohol and substances to quiet his restlessness. In his mind, they weren't just vices, they were escape routes. "I thought it made me creative," he once joked darkly, "but really it made me lost." His relationships mirrored that same pattern. Before Nicole, Keith dated model Nikki Taylor and later was linked to Laura Sigler, a woman who would later describe him as seductive but never ready to settle down. That restlessness was a clue. Keith was always chasing peace but never finding it. By 1998, things spiraled out of control. His family and friends convinced him to enter rehab, marking the first time he publicly confronted his addiction. After completing treatment, he released his debut solo album in 1999, which became a modest success. It seemed like a new beginning, but old habits die hard. The early 2000s were a turning point. Professionally, Keith's career was climbing fast: awards, hit singles, and sold-out tours. Personally, he was crumbling. The stage became both his salvation and his downfall. The applause drowned out his self-doubt, but once the lights went down, the silence came roaring back. Loneliness is a strange thing in fame. It doesn't come from being unseen. It comes from being seen by everyone but understood by no one. When Keith met Nicole Kidman in 2005 at a charity gala, he wasn't at the top of his emotional health. He was surviving, barely. Yet something about her presence cut through his noise. She was calm where he was chaotic, grounded where he drifted. "I thought she was way out of my league," he admitted later. "Not in a million years did I think someone like that would be interested in me." For months, he kept her number but didn't call. Maybe it was fear of rejection, of responsibility, of letting someone see the mess behind the music. But when he finally did call, the connection was immediate. Nicole, who had spent years surrounded by men who performed confidence, recognized sincerity when she heard it. Keith, for once, found someone who wasn't trying to fix him or worship him. She simply listened, and that changed everything. They spent hours talking, often about life, childhood, dreams, and fears. For the first time, Keith felt understood. For Nicole, it was healing, to be seen as something more than a Hollywood figure, to share laughter that wasn't rehearsed, to hear "I get you" from someone who meant it. Still, even as love bloomed, Keith's battle wasn't over. Addiction doesn't vanish when romance appears. It waits. But Nicole saw past it, maybe because she knew what it meant to live through someone else's chaos. When two wounded hearts find each other, the bond is deep, but it's also dangerous. They don't just fall in love, they start to believe that love itself can be the cure, and that belief would soon test them both in ways neither of them could have prepared for. Because the moment they decided to trust in forever, fate had already started writing its own twist. The spark. When two worlds finally met. It was June 2005, a charity gala filled with champagne, flashbulbs, and the usual parade of Hollywood perfection. Nicole Kidman, tall, graceful, and freshly healed from her heartbreak, was there as an honoree. Keith Urban, guitar in hand and wearing his signature half-shy smile, was performing. The night could have ended like any other: polite handshakes, brief small talk, and everyone going home to their own separate worlds. But fate had other plans. Their meeting wasn't loud or staged, it was quiet, almost cinematic. Keith later said he couldn't believe someone like Nicole would ever be interested in him. "I thought she was way out of my league," he confessed. For months after that night, he carried her number in his phone but couldn't bring himself to call. Maybe it was insecurity, maybe timing, or maybe deep down he was afraid of finding the kind of love that demanded he finally be honest with himself. Nicole, on the other hand, was intrigued. After years of being seen as Tom Cruise's ex, she wasn't looking for a savior or a celebrity. She wanted something real, someone who would meet her as Nicole, not as an icon. On the Ellen DeGeneres show, she admitted with a laugh that she had the biggest crush on him, but thought he wasn't interested. "He didn't call me for 4 months, she said, smiling, "so I figured it was over before it started." When he finally did call, something clicked. Their first conversation lasted hours. Two strangers speaking like old souls who had been waiting for that exact moment. There was no pretense, no show business mask, just two people who had lived through chaos, both quietly searching for peace. They talked about childhoods, family, and the cost of fame. Keith opened up about his struggles, not in detail but enough to show her the real man behind the stage persona. And for Nicole, that honesty was magnetic. When they met again, it was like no time had passed. Friends later described the chemistry as instant, the kind of connection that doesn't need words to exist. Their energy together felt calm, not rushed though. In hindsight, it might have been too calm before the storm. Keith said later in an interview, "We just talked and talked and talked. It was effortless." That word effortless became the foundation of their love. It wasn't born out of glamour, it was born out of two people exhaling after years of holding their breath. Within months, their relationship deepened. Nicole found in Keith a gentleness she hadn't experienced in years, someone who didn't overshadow her but stood beside her. For Keith, Nicole was a mirror, reflecting the parts of himself he'd buried under addiction and insecurity. For the first time, he wanted to be better, not for his career, but for her. In interviews years later, Nicole would call their meeting divine timing. She was 38, and after so much loss, she felt she was finally being given a second chance at love. Keith, too, described her as the missing piece he never knew he needed. He said, "She was what I'd been searching for my whole life." 6 months after that first phone call, Nicole had no doubt he was the one. On her 38th birthday, she woke up to find Keith standing outside her New York apartment at 5 in the morning, holding a bouquet of flowers. No cameras, no red carpet, just a gesture that spoke volumes. "That's when I knew," she later told People magazine. "That's when I thought, this is the man I want to marry." Their love wasn't built on sparks alone, it was built on the idea that two broken hearts could somehow create something whole. And when they finally decided to make it official, it wasn't just a wedding, it was a promise. But the universe has a strange way of testing what seems unbreakable. Because even though their love began with peace, it would soon be tested by storms neither of them saw coming. They thought they had found forever, but just months after saying "I do," reality would remind them that love alone isn't always enough. Quick pause. If you're finding this story as fascinating as we are, hit the like button. It really helps more people discover these hidden Hollywood truths. A fast-track love wedding, secrets, and second chances. When Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban decided to marry, it wasn't after years of long courtship or careful planning. It was fast, passionate, and beautifully reckless. They met in 2005, got engaged within months, and by June 2006, they were saying "I do" in a candlelit ceremony in Sydney, surrounded by friends, family, and a quiet hope that this time, love would last. The wedding was intimate but elegant, held at St. Patrick's Estate in Manly. Nicole walked down the aisle in a soft white Balenciaga gown, her face glowing not with fame, but with something more fragile, peace. For Keith, it was surreal. The man who once thought he wasn't good enough for her now stood beside her as her husband. Guest recalled the moment he whispered "I love you" before she even reached the altar. It wasn't a spectacle, it was two souls promising to start over. After years of chaos, Nicole burned her past, literally. She revealed in a later interview that she destroyed her old diaries, calling them filled with bad things. It wasn't an act of erasing history, it was an act of release. Her relationship with Keith marked a new chapter, one built not on celebrity or survival, but on vulnerability. In her own words, she said, "My life before Keith was about exploring different kinds of love, obsession, loneliness, even control. But this was different. Keith felt it too. In those early months, he described marriage as dangerous and raw, a phrase that spoke volumes about their connection. To him, being with Nicole wasn't comfortable, it was transformative. When you commit to someone like that, he told an interviewer, you live and die together by that decision. Their bond was fiery, almost spiritual, the kind of love that artists write about and dreamers envy. But love that burns so brightly can also leave scars. Within just 4 months of their wedding, the cracks began to show. Keith had been sober when they met, but addiction is a ghost that never truly leaves. As his old demons crept back in, Nicole was faced with a choice: walk away or fight for him. And she chose to fight. In October 2006, she staged an intervention. With the help of close friends, she convinced Keith to check himself into rehab, not out of shame, but out of love. She knew what it meant to stand by someone who was falling apart, and she wasn't ready to lose another partner to his own darkness. Keith later admitted, "I had no idea what was going to happen to us. I thought I might lose her, but she stayed. Through whispers, judgment, and the heavy silence of uncertainty, she stayed." While tabloids speculated, Nicole kept her composure. Publicly, she said little. Privately, she prayed that this time, love could save them both. Friends close to her described her as resilient to the point of exhaustion. For Keith, that moment became his turning point. Rehab wasn't just a second chance at sobriety, it was a second chance at life. When he returned home 3 months later, things were different. Keith said that getting sober freed him creatively, and much of that credit went to Nicole. She became his anchor, his calm after years of chaos. They moved into a quiet home in Tennessee, away from the flash of Hollywood, choosing slow mornings, family dinners, and a simple life. For the first time in decades, both of them were learning how to breathe again. But even as they built that peace, an undercurrent of fragility remained. Because while love can mend, it also remembers. Keith's past still lingered in the shadows, and Nicole's heart, though brave, carried scars from old wounds. Their story was becoming more than a romance. It was a test of endurance. Could two people who had already lived through storms truly find calm together? For a while, it seemed like they had. But beneath the surface of their quiet Tennessee home, time was already setting the stage for the next heartbreak. The first intervention, love versus addiction. Barely 4 months after the vows were exchanged, reality came knocking on the door of their fairy tale. To the world, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban were the perfect couple. Glamorous, successful, deeply in love, but behind the soft smiles and glossy magazine covers, something darker had started to creep back in. Keith was slipping quietly into old habits he had fought for years to bury. At first, Nicole noticed the small changes: exhaustion after shows, late nights that didn't make sense, words that didn't quite match his actions. She had seen this before in another life, but this time was different. This was the man she had promised to stand beside through everything, and she meant it. Still, she knew that love alone couldn't heal addiction. By October 2006, the whispers had become impossible to ignore. Friends grew worried. Keith's behavior turned unpredictable, and his performances carried a new kind of tension, the kind that only those closest to him could recognize. Then came the breaking point. Nicole, heartbroken but resolute, gathered his inner circle and staged an intervention. It wasn't public, it wasn't angry, it was desperate love. She wanted to save her husband before fame and the past swallowed him whole. Keith agreed to go to rehab, checking into the Betty Ford Clinic for 3 months. In later interviews, he spoke candidly about that moment, admitting that he had no idea what would happen to their marriage. "I thought I might lose her," he confessed. "I didn't know if she would wait, but she did." Nicole stood by him quietly, shielding him from the media and refusing to speak about his struggles. To her, this wasn't a scandal to explain, it was a soul to protect. While Keith was away, Nicole was often seen going about her days with quiet dignity. No interviews, no drama, just a woman holding on to hope. Those close to her said she visited him regularly, helping him focus on recovery. Keith later said her unwavering support freed him creatively and made him believe that real love was possible. When he finally came home in early 2007, things felt different. He was sober but fragile, rebuilding both his health and his self-esteem. Nicole welcomed him home with patience and understanding. They avoided the Hollywood spotlight and retreated to Tennessee, choosing peace over publicity. Their new life was slower, more grounded. They bought a farm outside Nashville, surrounded by open land and quiet skies. In that calm, they began healing. 2 years later, they welcomed their first daughter, Sunday Rose, followed by their second, Faith Margaret, in 2010. Nicole once said that motherhood anchored her, giving her the family she'd always dreamed of, one filled with love, laughter, and second chances. Keith often credited Nicole with saving his life. At a South by Southwest event years later, he told the crowd, "I was lucky I had a very loving wife. Getting sober freed me up creatively, and it changed everything." That confession wasn't rehearsed. It was gratitude wrapped in humility. But even as life settled into a peaceful rhythm, the undercurrent of fragility never disappeared. Nicole had saved him once, but deep down she feared she might have to do it again. She had walked this road before, loving someone through their demons, hoping love would be enough. And though they appeared happier than ever, smiling on red carpets, writing songs about each other, and celebrating anniversaries, every perfect photo hid the quiet truth. Survival had come at a cost. Their love had endured storms most couples never face. But endurance doesn't erase pain, it only teaches you how to carry it. And somewhere, beneath the laughter and the calm of their Nashville life, the cracks were quietly forming again. Because while Keith had conquered his old addictions, fame brings its own temptations. And soon, the man Nicole once saved would find himself at the center of headlines that no amount of love could silence. The family years, calm before the storm. After the intervention, it seemed like Nicole and Keith had finally found balance. They traded red carpets for quiet mornings, fame for family, and chaos for calm. Their Tennessee home became their refuge, far from Hollywood's noise, yet close enough for them to remember what they were running from. For the first time in decades, Nicole could breathe without cameras waiting at her window, and Keith could play music without pressure. They were both healing in their own ways. In July 2008, Nicole gave birth to their first daughter, Sunday Rose. The name itself symbolized peace, a day of rest, of renewal. Nicole said the name came to her in a dream, describing it as a reminder that new beginnings can come after dark nights. 2 years later, in December 2010, they welcomed another daughter, Faith Margaret, via surrogate. Nicole called her a miracle, and for a while it truly seemed that life had given her the family she had always longed for. Keith, on the other hand, poured his gratitude into his music. Songs like The Fighter and Gemini weren't just love letters, they were therapy. In interviews, he would smile when talking about Nicole, calling her his anchor, the person who taught him how to live with peace. On stage, his tone softened whenever he mentioned her. Fans loved that vulnerability. It made their marriage feel like a storybook redemption arc, the rock star saved by love, and the actress healed by faith. When Nicole's father passed away suddenly in 2014, Keith's devotion was on full display. He flew across the world to be by her side, and even performed Amazing Grace at the funeral. That moment captured who they were, two people bound not just by love, but by loyalty. The tabloids called them Hollywood's most grounded couple, and for a while that title fit perfectly. Their farm life in Tennessee was peaceful, filled with small joys, riding horses, family dinners, and backyard music nights. Nicole often said she loved how real life felt there. They weren't movie stars or musicians, just mom and dad. Their daughters became their center, and Nicole once said she wanted them to grow up knowing love that's steady, not loud. But behind the scenes, the cracks were subtle, the kind only two people deeply familiar with pain could recognize. Fame doesn't disappear, it lingers like a shadow. Keith's touring schedule meant long stretches away, sometimes months at a time. Nicole stayed home to raise their daughters, often filming projects closer to Nashville to keep the family together. But as the years passed, their paths, once perfectly aligned, began to drift. Friends close to the couple described them as two ships passing in the night. They were still affectionate, still supportive, but something was missing. The spark that once set their world on fire now flickered quietly. Their love had evolved into companionship, but in the process, some of the passion had been lost. Still, Nicole refused to let the distance define them. On their 19th anniversary in June 2025, she posted a warm photo on Instagram, smiling beside Keith with a caption that read, "Forever my love." Fans flooded the comments with hearts, celebrating their enduring bond. But behind that post, whispers had already begun, rumors that Keith seemed distracted, emotionally distant, and not himself. During an Australian radio interview just days later, a host jokingly asked Keith how he felt watching Nicole's on-screen love scenes with younger actors. The question caught him off guard. His face froze, his voice faltered, and the call abruptly disconnected. It was awkward, unsettling, and instantly went viral. Fans noticed the tension. The media called it a crack in the perfect picture. By late summer, sightings of the couple grew rarer. Nicole appeared at events alone, while Keith was seen spending more time in recording studios. Neither addressed the rumors, but silence in Hollywood speaks louder than denial. The peace they had worked so hard to build was beginning to tremble again, not with anger or chaos, but with quiet distance. Love, no matter how strong, can only survive so long when two people start living in separate worlds. And soon, that gap between them would open wide enough for the entire world to notice. The separation, headlines, and heartbreak. By the time the video of Keith's lyric change reached its peak online, the news was already official. Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban had separated after 19 years of marriage. On September 29, 2025, multiple outlets confirmed the story that fans had feared. The couple who once seemed inseparable were now living separate lives. For most of the world, it came as a shock. For those close to them, it was only the public unveiling of a heartbreak that had been slowly unfolding for months. According to People, the separation was confirmed on September 29, 2025, followed by Nicole's official divorce filing on September 30, 2025. These reports, published by People's editorial team, serve as the primary verified timeline for the split. According to People, insiders claim Nicole had been fighting to save their marriage, even after the emotional distance had become unbearable. She was described as hurt and betrayed, struggling to make sense of how a love that had survived addiction, loss, and 2 decades of pressure could dissolve so suddenly. Friends said she was devastated, but determined to stay graceful. That grace became her shield. The same quiet strength that had carried her through her first divorce now carried her again. Keith, meanwhile, remained mostly silent. He didn't release any formal statement, didn't address the scandal directly. His only public words came in the form of a concert dedication days later, a vague emotional speech about learning how to let go with love. It was heartfelt, but also hauntingly ambiguous. Fans were divided. Was it an apology, a farewell, or both? Then came the flood of speculation. Entertainment outlets filled the silence with their own versions of the story. TMZ reported that the couple had been living apart since early summer, with Nicole staying at their Nashville home while Keith had quietly moved into a downtown apartment. Star magazine published a sensational piece claiming their intimacy had vanished years ago, and on social media the theories multiplied. Some said Keith's touring lifestyle had driven them apart. Others whispered about jealousy, exhaustion, or the simple erosion of time. A few days later, Rob Shooter, a well-known Hollywood gossip reporter, appeared on his podcast claiming that Keith had been romantically linked to more than one woman. The phrasing was careful. Allegedly, reports suggest insiders believe, but the implication was clear. Whether true or not, the damage was already done. The narrative had formed. The loyal wife, the drifting husband, the story everyone loves to tell but no one wants to live. Still, even as rumors swirled, Nicole refused to retaliate. No angry interviews, no veiled comments, no public tears. Her silence spoke louder than any denial could. Friends described her as composed but deeply wounded. One close source told Entertainment Weekly that Nicole didn't expect perfection. She just expected honesty. To be honest is weak to provide. And when that disappeared, everything else followed. The press devoured the story, dissecting every detail of their past. Old interviews resurfaced. Keith's quote about being addicted to chaos, Nicole's reflections on dangerous love. What once sounded romantic, now read like foreshadowing. Even the lyrics to Keith's older songs were reinterpreted under a new, darker light. Meanwhile, Nicole focused on her daughters. She was seen attending church with them in Nashville. Her expression calm, her posture steady, no makeup, no entourage, just a mother trying to protect her children from the world's noise. She told friends she was done chasing closure. For her, peace mattered more than explanations. The heartbreak, however, wasn't one-sided. Those close to Keith said he was broken but proud, struggling privately with guilt. He knew what the headline said, but he also knew how much she had once saved him. That knowledge, according to one friend, was something he'll carry for the rest of his life. By October, the divorce papers were in motion, and the once unshakable power couple had become another Hollywood statistic. Yet beneath the gossip and the noise, there was a quieter truth. Two people who had loved each other deeply, but couldn't keep that love alive under the weight of fame, expectations, and unspoken pain. As one of Nicole's friends told Vanity Fair, she's not angry, she's heartbroken, but she knows she did everything she could. Sometimes, love just runs its course. It was a tragic full circle. The young woman who once lost herself in Tom Cruise's shadow had spent 2 decades trying to build something real, only to watch it crumble again. But this time, she wasn't shattered, she was wiser. Because when love finally ends, it's not always with fire. Sometimes, it ends quietly, with 2 people walking away from something they still wish could have worked. And for Nicole Kidman, this heartbreak wasn't just another chapter in her story. It was the final test of how much a heart can endure and still stay open. The pattern repeats. Love is a rescue mission. In the quiet that followed the headlines, a familiar pattern began to reveal itself. One that stretched back decades, through different faces and different years, but always the same emotional rhythm. Nicole Kidman had always loved deeply, but she also loved to save. Whether it was Tom Cruise in his world of control or Keith Urban in his world of chaos, Nicole's love often became a lifeline, the kind that kept others afloat, even as it slowly pulled her under. Those close to her said she carried an invisible weight, a need to fix what was broken, to nurture what was fragile. It wasn't weakness, it was empathy turned into endurance. When she loved, she gave all of herself, time, energy, even peace. But when you spend years trying to heal someone else's wounds, you sometimes forget your own. And by 2025, Nicole had spent most of her adult life doing exactly that. Keith, to his credit, never denied what she had done for him. He said it himself, she saved him from addiction, from self-destruction, from the emptiness that fame often brings. But salvation, when it becomes routine, starts to feel like duty, and love that feels like duty slowly turns to exhaustion. For Nicole, the marriage that began with passion and mutual healing had quietly turned into caretaking, one more emotional battle she fought behind closed doors. Friends described her as patient but weary. One longtime confidant told Vanity Fair, she's always believed love can fix people, but at some point, she realized she couldn't keep doing it alone. The irony wasn't lost on her. She, one of the most powerful women in Hollywood, couldn't control the one thing that mattered most, keeping love alive. The more she tried to protect Keith from his own demons, the more she lost pieces of herself. He had music, audiences, and the escape of touring. She had silence, reflection, and the steady ache of trying to hold a family together. And yet Nicole never played the victim. She didn't lash out or seek revenge. She spoke about forgiveness, faith, and the belief that love, even when it ends, is never wasted. Everything teaches you, she once said in an interview. Every person, every heartbreak, every ending. Those words, once philosophical, now sounded like a quiet acceptance of her own truth. Even in the middle of pain, she handled everything with grace. While gossip columns speculated, Nicole turned her energy toward her daughters and her craft. She threw herself into work, not as an escape, but as a reminder that she still had purpose outside of marriage. She began choosing roles that mirrored resilience, women who had been tested but refused to break. Meanwhile, Keith's silence spoke volumes. His performances carried a different tone, somber, emotional, occasionally nostalgic. Fans noticed that he avoided playing the fighter for months, as if even the melody carried too much history. In one concert, he paused mid-song and told the crowd, "Sometimes love doesn't end, it just changes form." It was subtle, but for those who had followed their story, it felt like closure disguised as poetry. The truth was that Nicole had always believed love was meant to heal, but sometimes, love's greatest act of healing is knowing when to let go, not out of bitterness, but out of mercy for both people involved. Her story, from Tom to Keith, wasn't one of failure, it was one of evolution. She had learned that strength isn't in holding on, but in knowing when your role in someone's story has ended. And through it all, she never stopped believing in love. Just a different kind of love. One that doesn't demand fixing, rescuing, or surviving. One that feels calm, steady, and mutual. After all the heartbreak, all the noise, and all the lessons, Nicole wasn't broken. She was refined, a woman who had given her heart fully, and still had the courage to keep it open. Because for Nicole Kidman, every ending was never really the end. It was simply a new beginning written in quieter ink. Closing reflection, from scandal to strength. When the dust finally settled, the headlines began to fade, and the world moved on to the next Hollywood drama. Nicole Kidman didn't. She didn't chase attention, didn't respond to rumors, and didn't defend herself in interviews. Instead, she did what she's always done best. She turned pain into quiet power. For months, she stayed out of the public eye, focusing on her daughters and her work. Friends said she was at peace for the first time in a long time. Not because everything was perfect, but because she had finally accepted that not every love story is meant to last forever. Sometimes the most powerful ending is the one where you walk away with dignity, not destruction. Hollywood expected tears, drama, or bitterness, but Nicole gave them grace. She wasn't running from heartbreak, she was walking through it, head high, heart intact. In a rare interview months later, she spoke briefly about resilience, saying, "Pain is not permanent. You learn from it, you grow through it, and then you let it go." Her words weren't just reflections, they were a declaration. She had loved deeply, lost quietly, and rebuilt herself without noise. Her story wasn't about scandal anymore, it was about survival, about choosing peace in a world that feeds on chaos. And Keith, he carried his lessons too. The man who once sang about being the fighter had learned that some battles can't be won through music or promises. His later performances took on a humbler tone, as if every note carried a memory, not of guilt, but of gratitude. He often spoke about letting go with love, and perhaps that's what both of them had done. Looking back, their story wasn't a tragedy, it was human. Two people who met in the middle of their pain, healed together for a while, and then drifted apart when their healing was done. The love was real, the struggle was real, and so was the ending. For Nicole, every heartbreak had taught her something. From Tom Cruise to Keith Urban, she had learned that love isn't about rescue or endurance, it's about freedom. Real love doesn't cage you or consume you, it steadies you, and when it's over, it teaches you how to stand on your own again. She once said, "I believe in love completely, I just believe it looks different every time." Those words now feel like her final act of closure, not regret, not sadness, but understanding. She didn't lose herself in love this time, she found herself through it. And so as Hollywood's lights turned to someone else's story, Nicole Kidman stood quietly in her own, stronger, wiser, and finally free. Not as a wife, not as a star, but as a woman who had faced every kind of heartbreak and still chose to believe in hope. Because the truth is, every ending leaves behind a lesson. And for Nicole Kidman, the lesson was simple. Some stories end, not because they failed, but because they fulfilled their purpose. If you found this story powerful, take a moment to reflect on it, because sometimes the most inspiring love stories aren't the ones that last forever, but the ones that teach us how to begin again. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe, because there are more real human stories behind the fame that deserve to be told, just like this one.